We have a new guest who's joining us in the studio. His name is Sundeep Raichura. Sundeep is a man who's really experienced in matters of investment. He is a CEO of Zamara Group and chairman of the Kenya Pension Fund Investment Consortium. We'll be talking about this NSSF story. Days are coming to an end. The month is coming to an end. We'll have new contributions to NSSF. Why? How much? How? That's what we'll be discussing. Siti?
Yes?
Please welcome Sundeep with the day's proverb.
Yes, our proverbs for the whole of this week have been from the country of Tanzania. I've been challenged and I've been asked why it is I only cited two proverbs using the Kiswahili language. And the simple answer, it is my prerogative to determine in which language I present the proverbs. So it's simple.
Okay.
There is no democracy here, neither is it guided. Okay? Whoever despises a thorn in his foot will see it swollen or bloated.
Whoever despises a thorn in his foot
Yes.
will see it swollen or bloated.
Yes.
Good morning, Sundeep.
Very good morning, Eric.
Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the hot seat of Kenya's biggest conversation. That proverb is from Tanzania. So forget the Swahili version. Let's just do the English one. What do you understand that proverb to be saying?
Okay, so the way I look at it is if you have a problem and you don't deal with it, and you don't deal with it decisively and on time, you are going to create a much bigger problem in the future. And that is why I use the English version of this, which is a stitch in time saves nine. And that very much, I believe, sets the theme for our conversation today. And I'm definitely going to take out my 1 month subscription, my free subscription for Spice. Is it the Showmax?
Yes.
Even as I pay my higher NSSF contribution this month.
Deal with the small issues today.
Yeah.
Because they could become bigger. Sundeep, tell us about Zamara Group. What do you do at Zamara Group?
Okay, Zamara.
And is green your corporate color?
Yes, green is part of our corporate colors, and that's why I'm wearing it. Zamara is a diversified financial services group. We specialize in actuarial services, pensions, medical insurance. We are by far the largest pension fund provider in Kenya and Eastern Central Africa. We have a presence in 7 countries actually now, because we've just moved into the DRC. So we are in 7 countries in Africa, and we have a Pan-African ambition.
When you say you're the biggest pension fund provider, what does that mean?
So we are the largest pension fund administrator in Kenya. We look after the retirement benefits for close to 200,000 Kenyans, spread across more than 350 corporates. The total assets that we look after, or total assets under administration, are over 350 billion shillings, which is a sizable portion of Kenya's pensions industry.
We've had the former CEO of the Retirement Benefits Authority here, and we've even had senior managers from RBA, and they've tried to explain to us that many people get to understand. When you talk about a pension, there are 3 different entities that deal with your pension. Are they 3? Am I right?
Yeah, around 3.
Okay. So who are they? And then...
Okay. So there are 3 entities, as you say. So we are pension fund administrators as Zamara. So our role is to work with the pension funds, the sponsors of pension funds, the trustees of pension funds, to ensure that the member records are being properly kept, the historical records are being kept, the contributions are being properly allocated, members' benefits are being paid, taxes when required are being paid, the books and accounts are being kept, documentation, compliance is being done, and a very, very important function that we do as Zamara is to ensure that members of pension funds are properly guided, they get the right information in terms of how much they are saving, what their options are when they retire or otherwise exit, and overall is to ensure that the day-to-day operations of a pension fund work well. You then have the investment manager, whose job is to invest the money in accordance with the policy that has been set by the trustees of the pension fund. Okay, so their job is to implement the policy. They don't hold the money. The money is held by an independent custodian. So this is typically a bank. So that bank will hold the money, they will hold the title deeds, they will hold the securities, they will collect the dividends, they will execute the trades. So it's a system of checks and balances where all 3 of us check our work. It's a system that has safeguards in it, so everything tends to work well. And this is why the pension system in Kenya has been a good success story for us and something that we can be proud of in the whole of Africa.
You say it has been a success story. What are the pillars and the structures of this success? What are the things that we see that make us resoundingly accept or say that it is successful?
Okay, so let me just rewind back to 20 years ago, okay, where we had a pension sector that, members' interests were not always protected well. Schemes were not being well run. Pension funds were simply an extension of the employer. You had poor investment decisions being made. We saw them in the papers all the time. And the member of the pension fund was not well taken care of. Post the legislation in 2000, we have seen a very sea change. We have seen very, very good protection of the benefits of members of retirement funds. We have solvency standards for pension funds. There are criteria on how benefits must be calculated, how fast they need to be paid. There is a huge improvement in the governance of pension funds through participation by members, through the separation of roles that I talked about between an administrator, fund manager, custodian, and requirements for annual general meetings, higher disclosures and transparency. So all of that has worked well. And when you look at the assets in the industry, they have grown from 80 billion in the year 2000 to 1.6 trillion now. So that's a very significant growth. However, when you look at other measures which are equally important, are more Kenyans covered? I think we are failing. Are the benefit outcomes much better? Are we meeting, are Kenyans retiring with decent, reasonable benefits? We don't seem to be doing well. Are the benefits we are paying, are they sustaining people in their old age? Again, the answer is no. Okay, these assets that we're accumulating, the 1.6 trillion, yes, it has done hugely good for our country, but are we kicking at our potential? Could we be doing much better? And that is why a piece of legislation of the type we are discussing today becomes important, because it helps us to deepen that policy reform that we started off in 2000, that journey we started then. So things are working. We've covered a lot of ground, but if we are to make a real difference, we now need to make bolder policy decisions.
Okay. So this most recent one that we've seen, obviously, is an increase in the amount of money that Kenyans are going to pay towards saving. Now, when you say that we will then be able to do better, that in terms of the development, what exactly? Are we talking about direct benefit to every Kenyan who puts this money aside? Or are we talking about systemic policy? What is it that we are talking about when we say that with the change in this policy, then we'll be able to do better? Who then is the beneficiary of the better?
Okay, absolutely. Look, so first thing I think it's important for all of us to appreciate, this is not a new piece of legislation. The NSSF Act of 2013 was actually enacted in the year 2013. Okay, it was passed as law in December 2014 and was supposed to have been implemented it was passed as law in 2013 and was supposed to have been implemented from 2014. However, because the matter was taken to court, the implementation did not happen until the Court of Appeal reinstated the legislation about 4 weeks ago. And as we all know, there is an appeal before the Supreme Court as well. Okay, so there's still possibly a journey to this act. But this act is, and you see, the one thing I should say is that, and I'm really happy that I have a chance to reach out to Kenyans and engage with them on your show, because when I read the sentiment on social media, the papers, it is very negative. So most Kenyans, when you talk to them, they will say this is yet another tax.
Yep.
People will say that this is happening at the worst possible time when businesses are struggling and Kenyans are struggling. But I'm hoping to share a perspective that I hope will help all our citizens to look at this differently, to reflect on this, because where I sit, this is a piece of legislation whose purpose is very noble. This is a piece of legislation which is saying, which wants to impact the future financial well-being of all Kenyans. It is about ensuring that every Kenyan has a pot of money that is going to be reasonable to take care of them in their old age? Or should something happen to them whilst they're working, they have something to fall back upon? Or if the breadwinner in a family dies, the family is not left vulnerable. So this is about fortifying our citizens against the economic shocks that they will face in their day-to-day lives. But also importantly, this is a piece of legislation that, if implemented properly, will create huge benefits to our economy. In terms of the savings that will be mobilized, if they can be harnessed into productive areas of investment, we will grow our economy. We will create those jobs that we desperately need. We will build the infrastructure that we want. We will reduce our reliance on foreign debt. We will reduce the rate of interest, the interest rates in our country, build our capital markets. So there's a good number of byproduct benefits that flow from this. So yes, there is an increase in the level of contributions, but this is being accompanied by a corresponding increase in the level of benefits. And I think it's good, that I can demonstrate this to people.
Yes.
If you look at Kenya, right, we have 18 million Kenyans in our workforce. Okay. More than 85% of these are in our informal sector. Okay, so they're not earning a salary like you and I. Okay, 80% of jobs are being created in the informal sector, and there's something we need to do about these people who are excluded from our formal pension system. But let's look at you and I, who are in salaried employment. How much are we paying for our pensions? Okay, so if we only participate in the NSSF, without any other supplementary pensions, the employee is paying 200 shillings, the employer is paying 200 shillings, that's 400 shillings. Okay, you multiply that by 12, that's 4,800, roughly 5,000 a year. Okay, and let's take a Kenyan who starts working at 25 and religiously saves for the next 30 years to 55. So that's 5,000 times 30 years is 150,000. And let's say you hire the best managers. You even bring them from abroad if you think Kenyans are not good enough to invest your money. How much will you get? Maybe 300,000. You could at best double the money. Is that enough to send a Kenyan home into their sunset years?
At 55.
At 55. I mean, it's a joke, as our president says, right? Now, let me put the question the other way. There are 80,000 plus employees in Kenya. The number who offer retirement benefits like Zamara and the Standard Group is just over 3,000. Almost 75 to 80,000 employees in Kenya are not making any supplementary provision for their staff. And what this act is saying, look, if you have a pension scheme for your staff, that's fine. You can opt out of a substantial portion of this new legislation. But if you don't, the default is you must contribute. Why should we not have saving for our people? Okay, and that is why what this act is saying is that 200 shillings cannot work. By the way, people don't realize that when the NSSF started in 1965, okay, actually the rate of contribution was 10% of your pay, but there was a monetary ceiling. And that monetary ceiling has only been changed twice in the last 57 years. First in 1978, so it moved from 40-40 to 80-80. And then in 2001 to 200-200. And I've already explained that 200-200 will not get us anywhere. So what this legislation does to get to the crux of your question...
What was the logic behind the 200? Why 200?
It's anybody's guess, right? So what I'm saying is, it was there for historic reasons, and what happened is that instead of taking a bolder decision then to say let's raise it, it wasn't done. And now again, the NSSF, as you know, has had a checkered history, and there's all.
It wasn't the right time to.
There were all those issues that needed to be dealt with as well. But look, and this is why sometimes I say this act should not even have been called the NSSF Act, because it is actually a reform of Kenya's pension system. It is, first of all, it is saying every Kenyan in the formal sector needs to contribute a sensible amount. Their employers need to contribute for them, so that when people retire, they will have a decent benefit. And even by the way, the 12% is not enough. It's only the start. We have to move it over time. Okay? So, yes, this is higher contributions, but correspondingly higher benefits. Okay, I've also mentioned this opting out. So to people, to employers who run their own plans, you can actually structure them such that you can substantially opt out of the NSSF.
What does that mean?
Okay, let's talk about it. Okay, so this NSSF, so the first thing is this piece of legislation says contributions are at 12% of pay, and they are being phased in over a period of 5 years. And this is why when you see the communication, people are saying the 400 is going to 2,160 or 200 is going to 1,080. Okay, but over the next few years, these numbers are going to increase, and ultimately Kenyans will be contributing at 6% of their pay. Their employers will be contributing 6%, so it's 12,000. It's 12%. So if anybody is earning a salary of 50,000, the contribution will be 6,000 shillings. Okay, all right. Now, these contributions are in two buckets. There is what is called Tier 1 and Tier 2. So Tier 1 contributions are contributions based on earnings up to the minimum wage. Okay. Tier 2 is anything over and above that. Okay. So Tier 1 has to go to NSSF. The default is that Tier 2 also goes to NSSF unless as an employer you opt to contract out. So when you contract out, you have to either set up your own scheme or participate in another scheme.
Or join another scheme.
Or if you have your own scheme, you can opt out through your own scheme. Okay? Now, therefore, a substantial portion of the contribution is with your employer if you opt out, if the employer chooses to opt out. Okay, so that's how the Tier 1
and by saying opt out,
yes,
are we talking about opting out of this 6%, 6 plus 6%?
No, that's a very important point.
Or is the 6% locked
first of
to
all,
NSSF?
the overriding objective of this act is to say people have to contribute in aggregate the 6%, 6% by employees, 6% by the employer. Okay, so that is there. However, you then have a choice as to where that 12% goes. Okay. Now, there is the first tier where you don't have a choice. That does go to the NSSF, and there are important policy reasons for that. The balance, which is for most employees, the bigger portion of their money, can go to another plan. Okay, provided it is approved, it meets certain standards, which is important. Okay, I hope that clarifies the Tier 1, Tier 2
That one
opting out.
does, yes.
And I hope it also clarifies that, look, this is not a train smash. I mean, these contributions are being phased in.
It's progressive over 5 years.
It's progressive, and they are being progressed so that the employers, the impact on them is being phased in. The impact on our take-home pay as individual Kenyans is also being
phased in,
being mitigated.
There's a bit of a problem here, though.
Yes.
When you talk pension, you're talking the future.
Yes.
The very distant future.
Yes.
Now, how do you communicate the future in an effective way to someone who has a problem surviving on a daily basis?
That's a fantastic point you raised, right? So, and this is the typical response that we get for most people, and a lot of people that I speak to, when you talk pensions, they will give you either a disinterested look or a yawn and say that I've got more pressing priorities now. And I would say that, look, if it is hard enough to make ends meet now, how much harder will it be when you no longer have an income, okay, to be able to rely on, okay? But in my conversations with policymakers in Kenya, what I say is that, look, to have a pension system with a singular focus on saying to people, save for your old age, is not going to resonate with Kenyans. Okay, so we need to look for a way that we can accommodate wider savings priorities. So people want to, yes, saving for old age is very important and must be mandated as the law does. But what about housing? What about education? What about other needs? What about the need to have an emergency fund? And COVID-19 showed us that it's important for us to have that. So if we can accommodate wider savings priorities, I believe Kenyans will engage a lot more with their saving. And that's important, because this must not be seen as a tax. Because at the end of the day, I would want every Kenyan to say, look, you have your own pot of money, which is growing, which you are substantially in control of. And there are many things you can do with that pot of money, even as you keep growing it till when you're no longer going to be able to work.
Sure.
Okay, so I think the messaging 100% needs to change. And that's where I feel we're doing a terrible job of communicating this act. Okay? Because to say, this is at 6%,
Deduct
but not
6%.
selling the benefits of it, right, is not good.
Indeed. The guardian, or rather the custodian of the fund, also is a matter of importance for a lot of people to say that, all right, so you're putting this money away. What are the guarantees that actually coming out on the tail end of your saving, that you will not then be put through a frustrating process of getting your money out?
Okay, so look, firstly, as I mentioned, the pensions legislation in the country, the Retirement Benefits Act, is very tight, okay, in terms of how this money is looked after, how the money is being invested, how the benefits are, how members' interests are being protected. So there's a lot of checks and balances. But if you look at the NSSF Act of 2013, again, there are significant measures to strengthen the corporate governance of NSSF. Okay? So the NSSF has to comply with the requirements of the Retirement Benefits Act. It has to have an investment policy, which it already does. Its monies have to be invested in line with the investment regulations and by external managers. And what a lot of people don't know is that for the last 10 years, in fact, since 2011, the assets of NSSF are being managed by external managers. Okay, 80% of the assets of NSSF today are looked after by professional managers who are licensed by the Retirement Benefits Authority, the Capital Markets Authority. The new act has provisions to control the level of expenses that the NSSF can incur. So there's a tight limit that on what they can spend. There are regulations on where they can invest, where they cannot invest. So there are requirements for publishing financial statements, disclosures to individual members, the requirements to have statements available at any time and online. So everything that you could think of that could go wrong has been taken care of. I mean, there's no ultimate safeguard, but but
at least a lot has been done.
A lot has been done. And I keep on saying that if you keep on judging an institution by its history, you will never make progress. If as a country we keep on dwelling on the past, we will never build a future for ourselves. Okay? So if people say, look, this is a piece of legislation which is good for our country, it is good for the individual Kenyan, it is good for our economy. And to every Kenyan worker I say, this is a piece of legislation. If you currently are in an employer that doesn't have a scheme, it's a 6% pay rise. It's ironic if you are protesting that.
Sandeep, the problem with our history and our past, and why we dwell on it often, it hasn't gone anywhere. It still dogs us. You would very much like to.
Nothing has replaced that history.
Yes, you'd really like to consign it to the past, but it keeps rearing its exceedingly ugly head, and so it becomes, yes, an issue that was of the past, but it dominates the conversation of the present. And the mitigating circumstances that are born out of conversations such as the one we're having aren't loud enough, aren't expansive enough. So they don't mitigate that old conversation. Let me give you, please go ahead, you want to say something?
Okay, no, I'm just saying, look, this is a very good philosophical argument, and it's good that we have it, right? Because, I think a lot of good things in my experience, and by the way, a lot of people call me naive to say this, right? Is that in my experience, a lot of good things that we try to do as a country are clouded by some of this history.
Yes.
That keeps on coming up, okay? And on this one, I would appeal to Kenyans to give it a chance, because the controls that are in place, the fact that the bulk of the money can be looked after by your own private employer's plan, okay, should give individual Kenyans and employers in the country the assurance that, look, this is something that can work. And the byproduct benefit that I talked about of the significant boost in our savings, what that can do for our country, we must not, and even if we don't have a perfect system, we cannot say that we are not trying. We're not doing things just because we are we are boxed into our history, which is not good, right? And we
Let's take
will
a break,
never
Siti.
do anything if we keep doing that.
It's
Okay?
27 minutes to 9. I want us to
Okay.
take a break so we can look at traffic and the weather forecast for the day. Sundeep Raichura is a CEO of the Zamara Group. He is also the chairman of the Kenya Pension Fund Investment Consortium. We are talking about the NSSF Act. He says, let's not call it NSSF Act. That's all it's called now. But ideally, it should have been called the Pension Act, right? Or something like that. We're talking about what the impact of this is. What does it mean? Trying to get to understand it better.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
We are talking about NSSF. There's a question that been asked by Julia. She says, an employer friend of hers told her that he is now going to cough an extra 350,000 shillings towards the employer's contribution to NSSF for his staff. He says, I have either to downscale my staff or close altogether.
Okay, Eric, so my assumption here is that this is an employer that has 350 employees, because the employer will then be contributing 1,000 shillings compared to the 200 shillings that he was previously contributing.
So this is in the first year.
In the first year. Okay. Now, look, it is a fact that under this act, the contribution rates are going up. Okay. So if you have an existing retirement plan as an employer, hopefully you can structure it such that the impact of this is completely cost neutral. So my expectation is that, my assumption therefore is that the employer that Juliet is talking about is one that doesn't have a retirement plan for its staff. And the question I would say, is it good to have one? Yes, it is. Okay. If you don't have one, should you be compelled then to contribute to the NSSF? I believe so, yes, because it is important that we take care of the long-term financial security of our people. Okay. Now, to this employer who is saying that, look, I will struggle. Okay. Look, I mean, yes, if you don't have a retirement plan, you are being given time to phase in those contributions. If it's going to be in an extra 350,000 shillings, I'm assuming that with a workforce of 350, you're running a substantial business. Okay. Now, if an extra 800 shillings a month, because that's what this act actually means in the first year, the 200 going up to 1,000. If that 800 shillings is actually going to kill your business, then maybe there are more fundamental problems that your business has, that the employer has, that you ought to be dealing with. Okay. Anyway. Okay. So, look, people will keep on saying this is the wrong time to do this. And again, I have a lot of sympathy for the view that maybe there should be a grace period, because this is happening in the middle of a financial year for most employers. People have put in their budgets, what they want to do and what they want to plan. So I have a lot of sympathy for that. But to say that we should never do it because of this, I would say there's never a right time. There will never be a right time. And given your interest in Proverbs, let me add another one to your collection. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. Okay. So these are things that are important for our country.
Something you've said, and let's just get into that for a little bit. If you have, as an employer, you have another pension scheme for your staff, how can you adjust this so that, like you said, it becomes net cost neutral?
If you have a pension scheme whose contribution rates are at least what are provided for in the Act, okay, then the impact to you is actually zero. Okay? Because the total contributions to the NSSF are lower than what are the rates of contribution to your own plan. If you opt out from the second year, yes, there is a bit more you will pay to the NSSF, but the bulk of the money stays in your own scheme, and the effect on you is completely zero. The only change that you need to make to your retirement plan is to ensure that when people retire, the bulk of the benefit is paid as a regular income. Because remember what I said earlier, the NSSF, even though it's got a fancy title, National Social Security Fund, for all intents and purposes, it was a provident fund, which simply gave you a one-off bullet point lump sum. And you and I know that lump sum payments are They are generally poorly applied, and our studies show the research that Zamara has done shows that most of this money is used up within less than 3 years of retirement, sometimes even shorter. So what this act says is that the bulk of the benefit should be paid as a regular income. So there are some adjustments that you need to make to the design of your retirement plan, but in terms of cost, it is neutral.
Sundeep, could you give us, oftentimes we're able to see the reality of things through example. Give us an example. It could be of another economy where we look at this model and it works from end to end, where folks are retiring at whatever age is set, and because of what they've put away for the last 20 odd years, it is actually happening and you can see that it works.
Okay. So look, I would say, there are no perfect pension systems in the world. And, yes, you can borrow from what others have done. You can learn from their successes and their mistakes as well. Pensions and social security ultimately needs to be homegrown. I mean, it needs to be relevant to the situation on hand, the country. Right?
Yes.
So we could talk about borrowing from the UK, the US, and whatever. I don't really believe they run perfect systems. Okay, there are possibly some good examples of countries like Singapore. Yes, they have their challenges, but in a country like Singapore, actually the contribution rate is 40%. Okay, it's 20 by employers, 20 by employees. But in Singapore, you have a pot for housing. You have a pot for your medical and for other things as well. Okay, there are countries that are looking at how to save for other purposes as well within a pension system. But look, I can say that if I look at countries with good retirement systems that have good outcomes for their members, for their citizens, with mandatory systems, they do tend to do well. In terms of the eventual outcome for the citizens of that country. The benefits to the economy can be huge. Okay, so there are examples like countries in Chile, Latin America, which implemented reforms of this type some years back. They've done quite well, right, in terms of, but again, they've also made mistakes.
Sure.
And we need to learn from those mistakes. Okay, for us, we need to look at a pension system that is relevant to our country, that recognizes the situation on the ground, that recognizes you have an NSSF, you have a private pension system. How do you get the best of both? Okay, and look, I would say that, look, even with this particular act, the NSSF Act, any new piece of legislation will have teething problems, will have issues, which hopefully can be dealt with over a period of time. Okay, so I'm not sure whether I've answered your question properly.
Sure. I mean, I hear you when you say there's got to be a homegrown solution. The mandatory aspect that you speak of, for me, sounds like, okay, in order for this to work in the manner in which it's originally fashioned through the Act, is that it cannot be that everybody then offers their opinion. It has to have been seen from, the end has to have been seen from the beginning. This is where we are going.
Yes.
Then it then must be something that everybody does, not that you can do, that you must do in order for it to work. Is that what we're saying?
Okay, look, so what I'm saying is that there is a very fundamental reason to make a pension system mandatory. Okay, so look, I would say that, you see, like our constitution has a provision that every Kenyan has the right to social security, of which pensions is one. Now, that does not mean that the government has to provide social security for every Kenyan. I think the government has to provide the framework, the enabling environment, and empower Kenyans to be able to save. Now, any decent society will want to ensure that its elderly are taken care of. And we are a decent society as Kenya, and indeed we already do it. All of us go out of our way to look after our elderly. Okay. Now, if you create a system where you say to people, save, we're giving you tax incentives to save, blah blah blah, save, and if you don't, we will actually take care of you. What happens? It will be people counterproductive. You're creating a moral hazard, because people will say, look, let me consume. Sandeep is saving, but Eric is not. But when Eric hasn't saved, the government will come and step in. Okay. Now, in order to protect against such counterproductive behavior, it is good to mandate a system. Okay. Now, to Kenyans who say, well, will be taken care of, I would say that the cost, and based on the numbers we have run, currently we're a young country. Yeah, I mean, our median age is only 19 years. But we have 1 million Kenyans above the age of 60. We have another million approaching that age. And in the next 20 years, we will be 10 million Kenyans above 60. The cost of providing them, even with a modest stipend, in today's money terms, is going to be 400 billion shillings per annum. Okay? That is like almost what we pay in salaries for public service employees. It's not possible. So the point I'm making about this issue about mandating or not, okay? Inaction for is not an option. Neither is a tax finance fiscal program by the government like Inwa Jamii. It will not be sustainable. The only sustainable option is to get Kenyans to save. Okay?
Sundeep, everything you're saying makes a hell of a lot of sense. Huh? And it is true. But the countries we keep talking about, whether it's Japan, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Switzerland, the thing that they have, which we don't have as a country, but we have it in communities, is a saving culture. The understanding of how to actually save money, so that irrespective of what happens, money is always being saved. When we talk about the issue of countries that borrow in excess of or as a huge percentage of their GDP, and Japan is given an example, most of their borrowing, you call it external, in that the government is borrowing, but it's from their own people. But the reason that is possible because they have a saving culture. People save. It's like an almost a moral duty. If you can't save, you are looked at with enormous suspicion. Now, how do you ensure the schemes we talk of are good now, but then how do we ensure that our future, who are our children, people who are younger, understand this need to save? It's not difficult to understand. Is it in our curriculums when we teach them? No, we do not teach them. Is it in primary school? No. Is it in secondary school? No. And yet there are subjects in which this could be taught and they could understand it. Communities that do this don't talk it, they teach it. It is practiced so people know and they grow up with it. Now, if we do not have a national culture of saving, this discussion we are having will continue having it, and this scheme will fail. It will not meet the goal it could meet. Because we talk about potential. If that potential is as real as we say it is, can you imagine just how much money our pension system would have if people understood and embraced the culture of saving?
Okay, that's a fantastic point. Look, so the countries you mentioned, they have a savings culture, and that's probably inbuilt. And actually, I have a challenge with a lot of my colleagues in the office as well to say, I mean, what's this? Why are you living hand to mouth every month? I mean, we're paying you well, okay? And that is a difference in culture. Okay, so the Asian economies, yes, the savings rate there are 35%. China is 50%. Okay, now, and a lot of that maybe is ingrained. And I would say that even for me, it's ingrained, right? I mean, it's part of us, right? But in an environment, in a culture where you don't have it, that is why that compulsion becomes even more important. Because left to their own, people are not going to save. Okay, so unless you compel them and you gently compel them to save, okay, through systems like this, okay. No matter your reservations about whether the money is going to be well looked after or not. I mean, that's a different problem. But where you have a culture that does not have a culture of saving, it is important that you engender it through systems like this. Okay?
How else do you do
But
it?
secondly, and very importantly to your other point, is we need to start from the youngest possible age.
Yes.
So teaching financial literacy, teaching saving, teaching budgeting should happen in our schools. And that is why as Zamara, we have a program called Zamara Angaza, which is actually saying, let's go to the lowest possible age. Let's teach young Kenyans from the beginning the value of saving, even as we teach them about integrity, about other good values that are very important for our country to deal with some of the issues that you mentioned. Okay, so what I'm saying is, yes, that is very important. We need to do it. It needs to be part of our school curriculum, and we need to promote this savings culture to everybody. Okay, and that is why conversations like this are critical and important. Okay, but during that time, we need to make sure we're doing something about this. Because trust me, if we don't do something about this, in the next 20 years, old age poverty is going to be the dominant cause of poverty, increase in poverty in Kenya, and indeed in the whole of Africa. This is a crisis of exponential proportions.
And
That
we can
because
see
we are
it.
all short-sighted, we are not seeing it. Okay, so I think this legislation will go a long way towards, first of all, getting people to save and having that pot.
You sell the case very well.
Yes.
And like you said, we didn't plant the tree 20 years ago. So this is the only other time that is left for us to plant the tree. However, now this is the other side of perceptions and all. Like Siti was saying, our history with NSSF, history with government and how government manages its own finances that we give it in terms of taxes. Now, when you see the president hosting, within the first 100 days of office, he's hosting pension fund managers and others and saying, okay, people come sit down. And the conversation is, how do we encourage the culture of saving, but how can we work together so that instead of government going to borrow out there, we can borrow money from you so that then we can use this money to build houses and affordable housing and all. And the history of seeing again the government pushing on this particular conversation and saying we need to contribute more so that then the government has access to cheaper affordable loans. You know, people sit back and ask, this is the same government that owes people 60 billion, is it 600 billion shillings in unpaid debt? This is the same government that is spending left, right and center and calling that spending austerity.
This is the same
And then this
government
is the
that
same
has
government.
blown its entire budget for the year in 7 months.
Yes.
Same government.
And it is proposing to spend 300 billion shillings more this year than it did last year. And then the government comes and says, you know, actually that law that we passed in 2013, now we're going to implement it and we start immediately. And this is what we want you to do. We want to compel you. First of all, start paying more money. Here's a question, an argument by Johnson. He says, this is actually a tax. This is how it's going to work. Step 1, get everybody to save. Step 2, get pension funds to lend to the government. Step 3, devalue the loans to government through inflation.
Okay, so we have I think, look, those are all observations that people make, and I'm seeing them all the time. Okay, but look, I'm saying that the system that we have is a good one, which ensures that this money is well managed in the best interests of the members of those retirement funds. Okay, now I am a very firm believer that this 1.6 trillion and hopefully 2.6 trillion, if we can get more savings, is used to build our country. Okay, because you see, pension saving is long-term saving.
Yeah.
Okay, and it is ideally placed to pension funds are hungry for long-term returns. Okay, and if they can get it by investing in good projects, whether they are infrastructure, whether they're housing, but at the same time, as long as you are not compromising on the returns to the members of the pension funds, and that is why there are trustees who have fiduciary responsibilities around these. There are advisors such as Zamara in terms of advising on investment strategy and where to invest, where not to invest. There are licensed managers in the country who have a duty to ensure that the members of pension funds are getting a good return on their money. But I believe for the pension sector in Kenya to be able to contribute to our socio-economic development as a country is important. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that tomorrow pension funds write a check to the government to say, hey, you're overspending, spend it. Okay? No, that is not. And that is why I believe that, look, all Kenyans need to step up. I mean, aren't we the ones who elect our governments? I mean, we are a democracy, yeah? And yes, it's good to see people are speaking out, like the question that you are asking, right? To say, look, this money is not to be misused. It is. And to the point about, is this money going to be loaned to government? Almost 40 to 50% of pensions money is actually invested in government securities currently.
And it is a good investment.
It is not a bad investment. It's giving 13-14% returns to pension funds. Okay?
Yes.
Now, look, I feel that we can keep on talking about everything negative. Okay?
But Eric, I would want to say for a moment, let's look at what is positive.
How can we safeguard those positives?
How can we safeguard those positives? Because of the checks and balances that are firstly inbuilt. The fact that if you were talking about a public-private partnership, this is it. Because firstly, as I said, you can opt out. So a substantial portion of your savings can be managed by the people that you appoint as managers and custodians and administrators. Okay? Even the money that is going to go to the NSSF, every check that you can think of is there. Okay? Now, unless we just believe that our systems are so rotten as Kenyans, then we don't have a chance as a country. But something like this is going to help to build our country. It is going to help to build our institutions. It is going to ensure that even if there is some compromise on the return, you are going to have a pot of money that you didn't even have before because you've been compelled to save. Surely. It's not a perfect system, and to the skeptics who are listening, I would say maybe it will never be a perfect system the way you think. But I'm an eternal optimist. I believe in our country, and I believe that we can do it. And that I'm saying, I appreciate there will be concerns, there are reservations, Eric. I'm giving a different perspective so that people don't look at this through a narrow prism and widen their thinking to say, look, let's not box ourselves like this, because otherwise, what are we going to tell our children? Just go away.
What's the alternative?
Yeah.
I mean,
what's
if we
the
box
alternative? This is
ourselves-
our country.
That's
Come
true.
on. Like, guys,
Sundeep, thank you. Thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for explaining. You've done a very good job. You've done a very, very good job.
It's been a great pleasure being here. Thank you.
Sundeep Raichura is the CEO of the Zamara Group and also the chairman of the Kenya Pension Fund Investments Consortium. He's been telling us about the NSSF and about thinking of saving for our retirement, because that's the bottom line.